IT guy here. So I want to thank you all just for taking care of all of our needs. There has been so much in so many ways. Some preachers, they come up here and they kind of give a big, how are we going to start this lesson out? There is no beginning. Bring my volume down. I can do that. Some people give a reason for their lesson. I'm not going to give a reason. There's no excuse for us to behave like we do sometimes. So we're going to talk about excuses, not just one time, but 3 times. Excuses, excuses, excuses. Did your parents ever tell you that? That's all I hear from you is excuses. And we bring that reputation upon ourselves because of what we're doing, the way we live. And it's a pretty bad character trait of a Christian to have an excuse. But yet we find them sometimes. We find these excuses. The definition of an excuse is it's an attempt to lessen or blame attaching a fault or to seek to defend or to justify. In other words, I'm going to tell you an excuse because I'm going to justify my doings. I'm going to give you an excuse so it lessens, what I did was not so bad. I have a reason for what I did. And there's a lot of us that do a lot of things that really don't have a good reason, but we like to excuse ourselves from those things. And shame on all of us for coming up with excuses, and some of them are so good. Benjamin Franklin said that he that is good at making excuses is seldom good for anything else. Because that's all you do is you make excuse after excuse. And I guess I'd like to get to know me better, or like to get to know you better, without having to use excuses. Why I did or what I did. It seems as though it's not just a pattern in our society, but it's everywhere. It's even in the Bible, by all means. People used excuses. The Bible typically portrays making excuses as it's a negative character trait associated with avoiding responsibility. Think about that. The reason we make excuses is because I've avoided my responsibility and I'm going to cover it up. Okay, it's basically responsibilities in spiritual commitments, and ultimately it's me making an excuse to fulfill God's commandments. Examples in the Bible are such as this, and I'll read with over here in Luke chapter 14, verses 16 through 20. This is no new read for any of us because we all know what this lesson's about. Jesus is giving them a parable about a rich man here. He said, a rich man, he made a great supper. And he bade many, and he sent a servant at supper time to say to them that were bidden, come, for all things are now ready. Come, it's all good to go. Everyone, come on, let's go. And the example here is in verse 18, and they all with one consent began to make excuse. And I want you to listen to these. You've probably heard these before. So they all began to make excuse. The first said to him, I brought a piece of ground, and I must needs go see it. I pray thee, have me excused. And I just want to break this down. We probably can fly right through these verses here, but a lot of you guys have land, I'm sure. But I doubt that any of you bought it without looking at it. But that was this man's excuse. I got to go look at my land. I bought it. I got to go check it out. How about this one? I bought 5 yoke of oxen. I must go to prove them. You're not going to check it out before you buy them? How many of us go around and kick the tires in the cars before we buy them and check everything else out? We're going to go buy something and not even know how good it is? Again, another horrible excuse. And the third one, maybe is the worst one. He said, I married a wife and I cannot come. I can't. Why don't you bring your wife with you? And there's a lot of things that we can just kind of say, well, these are pretty silly excuses. But when we find ourselves making excuses, first of all, we recognize that Jesus knew what he was saying. He knew that none of these excuses could hold water. And they're really sarcastic excuses. But how come everyone could see the lame excuses that I give except for me? Everyone sees that, the things that you're saying are just, that's a horrible excuse. That's a terrible reason to say those things. But yet we find ourselves making excuses, bringing things up because we think this is going to be it. And I think the bottom line here, and I'm going to probably say this more than once, but when I start to think of these things, I think of making excuses for you, okay? So I can pull the wool over your eyes, but God is never going to accept my excuse. That's something where I shirked my responsibility and I've come up with this lame excuse. I might win you over by doing that, but I'm not going to win God over. And so I want to make sure that I understand that for myself, to recognize that the excuses are nothing. So I've got what I put together. And I've read some of these things on the internet, what people think about, what are the top 10, if you will, excuses in the Bible. And let's listen to these excuses in the Bible, because, they're prone to making excuses too. The first one is, I don't know how you can see that. Oh, sure. The woman that thou gave me, says to Adam, blame her. That's my reason. So that's his reason. It was all, Eve's fault. And then Eve turned around and said, well, it wasn't me. Of course, it was the serpent. So my excuse is this serpent came and beguiled me. And then it gets into more deeper ones, like this one here, where Esau said that I was at the point of dying, so I had to sell my birthright. That's why I did it, okay? I was going to die if I didn't have this pottage. I don't know what the excuse that is, but how about this man named Naaman, who said, that he would be glad to obey God, but only they thought that maybe Albana and Pathar, the rivers of Damascus, they're much better than the waters of Israel. Maybe I not wash them and be clean. His excuse was that there's something better out there. So he was told to go dip himself 7 times to be cleansed of his leprosy, and yet he came up with an excuse to go somewhere else. Can I go over here instead? I don't know about you, but if a prophet of God told me to do something, I wouldn't come up with an excuse to go do something else or even suggest something else. This one I was really sad to hear, because I remember I talked the book of Judges a while back, and in Gideon, he was asked to go lead an army of God's people. And Gideon said, me? He says, my family is poor. Basically, we're the poorest family here in Manasseh. And he says, I am the least in my father's household. That he was like the worst of the worst of the worst. But yet God picked him. But his excuse was, we're just bad people. We're not the best of the best. And how about this one? I know this one for a long time ago. This man named Moses. I'm not eloquent. He says, I have a slow of speech and slow tongue. I'm not a good speaker. And yet I see Moses saying so many things in the Bible. God didn't recognize his slowness of his speech, and yet gave it to him. And the people of the flock, Saul said, it was them that spared the oxen, and they spared the sheep, to sacrifice. So it wasn't me. It wasn't me, the king. It wasn't my fault. It was the people's fault. That was his excuse. And he was told it's better to obey than sacrifice. Remember that? Jeremiah said, I cannot speak, for I am just a child. But yet Jeremiah wrote 2 books in the Bible that were just amazing books that Jeremiah had said and lamented. I don't know if any of us could lament like Jeremiah did. He was a good speaker, and God used him for his talent that he had there. How about this man, this person here that, that Jesus says, come on, let's go. And he said, let me bury my father first. Hang around here and wait till my dad dies, or, whatever the situation is. Let me stick around here. And then the number one thing was, I think that we all recognize it, is Aaron said, so they gave me gold, and we cast it into the fire, and out came this calf. And it's like, that was the reason that they bowed down and worshiped it, because it just jumped out of the fire. And of course, that calf was ground up, cast into the water, and they were told to drink of it. These excuses that we sometimes think about in the scriptures, how God had to deal with people, he still deals with people today. I want to make a note here that not one of these excuses changed God's mind on what God's purpose was going to be. God was going to use these people. He was going to make them do what he wanted them to do, regardless of their excuse. And sometimes I wonder, if I'm asked to do something, or I see the scriptures tell me to do something and I have an excuse, it doesn't matter, because God's still going to make me do what he wants me to do. And so I can kick against the pricks or I can do what God says. It'd be a lot easier, I think, if I just do what God says, first of all. Now, those are the top 10 excuses in the Bible. And then I just kind of said, well, what are my top 10 excuses? What do I come up with all the time? And so here's just the list that I came up with here. The first one is I have a job. The reason I didn't come or I didn't do that, I didn't worship God, is because I have a job. And just like certain denominations say, well, I'm this religion, so basically I'm saved. We sometimes come and say, well, I have a reason why I can't be at worship, and that's because I have a job. And I think about that. I think about when I got my job that I had for 37 years, it happened shortly after I got baptized. And that blessing that God gave me, I never used that as an excuse against being with God. It was the exact opposite. As a matter of fact, God has blessed me with this job. Nothing is going to take me away from this job is not going to take me away from God. But people will use it all the time. Yeah, I got a job, got to work, I can't be here, Yeah, I like to be here, but the job is a blessing. It's not this thing that you have to do. God takes care of all of our needs. This one here I hear a lot sometimes with brethren. I can't make it today because my wife or my husband is sick. And I'm thinking, okay, there's circumstances behind this, but if the wife doesn't drive and the husband's her ride, then I could see her staying home. But sometimes, if the wife is sick, maybe the husband could go and he can learn things and bring it home and share it to her. Instead of just saying, I can't make it. The wife's sick, I'm going to go work in the garden today. That becomes our excuse sometimes. We have to be mindful that we don't do that. We don't use that excuse. Car problems. Oh, can't make it to church, got a car problem. One of probably the best times I had at worship was when I called someone and told them I had a car problem. I called the preacher up and I said, look, there's snow on the ground, and the snow was basically up to the door handles on the car. And of course, me not being diligent and going out and shoveling and all that, I said, I can't make it. There's too much snow. And this guy had 4 kids and his wife in a beat up old Ford Granada. And he said, we'll be right there to pick you up. So the best lesson I ever heard, if someone calls me and say they can't come to worship because they have a car problem, I will fix that problem. I will pick you up. I will call out for help if I need a ride to worship. I don't need to make that an excuse not to attend worship. That cannot be my reason I can't do that. It's a lame excuse, because how many people have cars? How many other options do I have to get there? I can get there many, many ways. How about this one? I'm just tired. Welcome to my world. We're all tired. Drink coffee. we can get ourselves, you just can't say I can't make it because I'm tired, but we use that excuse a lot, perhaps. And is it acceptable for God? I'm tired. I forgot. I don't know, if you have a job, I think it's hard to forget Saturday and Sunday, because usually you have those days off. Most people live for the weekend, but they forgot. They just forgot. Now, I know once you get retired and all that, you wake up and you don't know what day it is. But I still remember what day is the Lord's Day. I still remember Wednesday nights, the night I go to Bible class. And so I look forward to those moments, those times, rather than saying, oh, I got to go to Bible class. I'm tired. Or, I can just say I forgot. We can say a lot of things. We can deceive ourselves in a lot of ways too. I overslept. Now, there's a caveat to this, and Tommy, don't get mad at me at all. Me and Tyler were talking, and Tommy kind of got into our conversation, and Tommy said, we overslept today. And I said, Tommy, that's in my lesson. But I also told you that I had it up here on the screen, but you passed the test because you still came late. That's the difference between someone who says, oh, I can't make it because I overslept. It wasn't an excuse. You were telling us a fact, but you fixed it. And that's the difference. In all these things we come up with excuses, we can find a way out of making excuses and we can fix the issue. We can get me and Renee have little scooters. You know what? Those little scooters against the church, we've drove them to church a couple times. So both our cars could be broken. We'll still make it. But when we fix the problem, that's better than just throwing out some kind of excuse like, well, you know, I'd have made it, but I overslept. You can oversleep. I'm glad you didn't oversleep till 1 today. And I know you guys are busy this week. There's a lot of stuff. I know what you're dealing with. But the point is, you still fix it. Don't be consumed or try to figure out what excuse we're going to use. I've seen more people spend more time trying to find excuses to do their work than it even took to do the work they had before them. How can I do this? How can I, say this and do that? I can't come because my family is here from out of town. We can use that excuse, but you know what the fix is to that? Bring them on to church with you. Come on, let's go. Let's get ready. You'll enjoy. You'll meet my brother and all these people. It'll be exciting. It'll be fun. It'll be spiritually enlightening. Rather than, Pops is here and, or Aunt Susie's here. We're going to have a barbecue today. I ain't going to make it to church because, the relatives are here. And you can come up with all these really cool reasons why not to be there. You can take them to the fair or whatever. Take them to the fair at 4 o'clock. We just like to bring these excuses. I didn't make it to worship last week because I was out of town. Really? You're on vacation? Wow. When do we vacation from God? Why do we tell ourselves it's okay to go on vacation from God? And I got good news for you all. There's a website called goodfight.com. And that, my friend, is how you will find a Church of Christ. It's a conservative Church of Christ, and you can worship there. So before you get in your car and go across the country, go to goodfight.com and find a church where you can worship with on Sunday morning. It's amazing what happens when you do that. Renee and I were in this little church in Edinburgh, Scotland, and we found a church online, and we called up and said, hey, just making sure you're there at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And the guy said, where you at? I'm picking you up. He come by and pick us up for church because we were going to take a bus. And he says, there's only one rule. If you come over, if I pick you up, you have to come over for lunch. I'm thinking, okay. Then the guy, after lunch, he took us to give us a detour of Edinburgh that I would have never got on my own. He took me to King James Castle. I mean, there's different places where I never even thought about going to when I was there. But don't say you're on vacation from God, because I have met so many brethren out of state, out of the city that I live in, because I've gone and I've made an exception to one of the things that I'm not going to be able to worship with my brethren in my city. I will worship with somebody else. We don't have an excuse, and we cannot use an excuse to go somewhere and not worship. That's unacceptable to God. That's putting whatever we're putting in front of it. So racing, if we're going to the racetrack, that's our new God, or the football game, or whatever it might be. Don't go on vacation from God. Church is boring. This is my excuse. I don't want to go. I only have 3 words for that. Make it exciting. You're going to go to church in the morning and you're going to say, I don't want to go today because it's just boring. There's like, no one talks to me. That's the next one I have on here too, is nobody talks to me. No one likes me. I'm just bored. Brethren, we've got to change that. We don't have to fall into now, even if you go to a church that's just a lot of deadbeats just sitting there, you go in there and you light the fire. You say good morning to people. I had a brother who I've known for a long time. He lived in Alaska, and he came to visit us in St. Paul. And, and it was me and Renee. It was our turn to be the greeters, and so we handed out the bulletins with all the prayer requests and things like that in there. And this guy took them out of my hands, and He stood at the door and he welcomed everyone. They're like, "Who are you?" He had no idea, but he just was doing it. He was being silly, kind of. But the point is that he got to introduce himself to everyone that walked in the door. So don't make things boring. If you're bored, that's not an excuse to say I'm not going to go to church. Or if no one talks to you, then you go ahead and start talking to people. I had all intention to go talk to people in the back row today, and I didn't make it back there. I was going to say hello, and even our other friend. I'm a visitor, just like some of you are. But I still like to meet new people. I love to meet brethren from wherever we are. But I cannot excuse myself in saying these are the reasons why I don't do what I'm doing. Somebody once said, tell God your excuses. Just you did pretty good at making all those excuses, but now tell them to God and see if God, he will abide by all those things as well. So all the reasons we do what we do here. So making excuses, there isn't one single word to describe, this person who makes excuses, but there are several terms that actually capture, the heart of this individual. You could call them a shirker, a slacker, a procrastinator, an avoider, a weasel, or a flake. And these words just suggest someone who avoids responsibilities or blame by just using excuses. There's really a deep reason why we come up with excuses. Here's the definition of those ones. A shirker or a slacker is someone implies it's someone who avoids work or duties. We probably have some of those at our jobs, right? A procrastinator or avoider suggests someone delaying or avoiding responsibilities. A weasel is a more informal term for implying someone who tries to get out of things with clever but often dishonest excuses. You think about that when you start to make up excuses. Why? How sometimes we can be very dishonest in even what we're saying. So in other words, the excuse is really a lie. So this is why I didn't do that. I was going to do that, but, I was going to come, but. And we come up with these things. And like I said before, your brethren are going to believe you. They're going to hear you out. But I don't know if that's something we can get away with saying to God. Why? All these things. And a flake is just a slang term for someone who's unreliable or someone who's easily swayed or someone who just doesn't follow through. Don't follow through. That's your reason why you don't do this. So over here in Proverbs, there are 6 things that the Lord hates. Yea, 7 are abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood. Verse 18 says, a heart that devises wicked imaginations, feet that be swift from running into mischief, and a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discords among the brethren. Many of these things are tied to our excuses. We're going to excuse ourselves and we will lie, as I mentioned. We will excuse ourselves and we will blame somebody else, which could be sowing discord, talking about somebody else, murmuring. We'll make excuses because we don't want to be the one that gets in trouble. The proverbial hand in the cookie jar, right? The cookie crumbs all over the beard. I didn't eat those cookies. Dennis, they get lost in your beard. But it's like you want to just go ahead and say that I didn't do it, but yet we did it. And we'll try to make an excuse. And it just doesn't work. Don't excuse ourselves. God knows our hearts. Listen to this proverb. Actually, I used this proverb a couple months ago. I was over here speaking to you. If thou sayest, behold, we knew it not, doth not he that pondereth the heart consider it? And he that keepeth thy soul, doth he not know it? And shall he not render every man according to his works? And using that scripture, when it is we say, we're making up an excuse, we say, I didn't know. That has got to be the biggest excuse we can come up with. It wasn't on my list of the top 10, but I didn't know. I wouldn't know because I wasn't attentive, because I didn't care. Maybe that's why I didn't know. I didn't want to be part of that, is because that's why. But God, he's going to see our hearts. And all these decisions we make and all these excuses that we're going to, and you think of those guys, they got the silver tongues. They just come out and they say, ba, 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 ba. And it's like, wow, that was a really good excuse. And it's like, and we swallow a hook, line, and sinker sometimes, but yet they're lying. And I hate to say this, but sometimes that's what we're doing too. We're using an excuse to cover up, a lot. It could be a lot of things. James says in verses 16 and 17 in chapter 4, but now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does it not, to him it is sin. So when we know to do something and we don't do it, don't look for an excuse. Call it what it is. It's a sin. And it's easy to kind of say, well, I really didn't mean to do that, or I didn't. It doesn't matter. I was talking to Tom after class. Scott after class today. Paul lived his life. He says, I lived my life in all good conscience. When he was persecuting Christians and going and doing all the things he did, God could have snuffed him out in a minute, but he didn't. He heard Jesus' voice when he was blinded, and Jesus said, why are you kicking against the pricks? And you talk about someone having fear. That's what me and Scotty were talking about. There was some fear there. But there's also a man that realized that, you know what? I made a mistake. No excuses. Paul didn't give no excuses. He did what he did. And he's just one of many men and women in the scriptures that recognized what they were doing and they had to change it. It wasn't someone saying, what's the best excuse you can come up with? It was saying, you need to deal with this thing. You erred. You committed sin, as it says here in James. So if we're truthful, we're going to admit that we've been guilty of making excuses for some reason or another. It comes out to, our relationship with God. Because if I talk to you like I'm talking to God, I'm not going to probably use as many excuses that I use with you. Because God won't have it. We make excuses for not praying. We make excuses for not studying. We make excuses for not going to church. And basically, not dedicating ourselves to God. We make an excuse for that too. I'm busy. But in all manner that he requires, the reason that God does not accept, he does not receive, the reason excuses don't work with God is because he knows the truth. There's no reason in us trying to come up with an excuse for God and say, well, God, this happened, that happened. There's no need to try to blame others and our own shortcomings. Just get it together, ask God to forgive you, and get back with God. Don't play around. Don't excuse why I did what I did and how. If we understand that God does not accept excuses, then we're going to recognize that God's going to put a conviction on us, and that all the excuses that we ever come up with, because he has already given us the power to do whatever he commands. If God tells us to do something, he expects it to get done. And forget about all the excuses that you want to look for. We are just thinking about it. I don't know about you, but my mind I think goes too fast. If you come to me and start talking about something, I'm going to start thinking of the thing to say back to you. Especially if it's you're accusing me of something. I got a good comeback. I'm going to think about this. And I don't even listen to what you're saying, but I can do the same with God too. God's saying you got to do this. I'm thinking, how can I get out of this? What can I say? What can I do? How can I, work around it? And I just wonder, how often do I do that to my brethren? How often do I do it to God? Remember this example of the parable of the talents in chapter 25 of Matthew? This is the example where Jesus said there's an example. Here's a parable of these men. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read the key point that I want to make with you this morning. Is in Matthew 25. And he gives these talents to these men who are able to do something with these talents. He gives to the one 10 talents. He gives the other one 5 talents. And he gives the other one 1 talent. I'm going to jump down to 24 because this is where the excuse comes in, okay? Matthew 25, 24. Then he which received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and I went and I hid thy talent in the earth, and lo, thou hast it thine. So his excuse was that he knew that his Lord was going to come back and expect of him. But instead of reacting on it, he hid it in the ground. And he was so happy that he didn't lose the talent. But yet he was expected to do something with. So his excuse was, hey, I know you're a tough guy. I know you would have taken out on me. And and we recognize this. And then you turn around and read what it says here. And his Lord answered to him, thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knowest that I reap where I sowed not, and I gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore have put my money into the exchangers, that had my coming, that I receive mine with usury, or with actually some interest. And so here he's going to use that excuse that I knew you're going to get more. I knew you were going to think more of me. And he said, well, you should have done what he said. And likely they just turned around and they said, throw him into you're an unprofitable servant, and cast him into the outer darkness, where there be wailing and gnashing of teeth. So that parable that Jesus is talking about is basically for us to recognize that when we are told to do something, do it. And your excuse is not going to cut it. Oh, God, I knew you wanted me to do something for you, God, and I just knew it, so I just made sure I didn't do anything else. I did, but you didn't do nothing. Our examples of just not following through with God show us where our hearts are with these different things. And if we don't do it, watch the excuse you give. Be careful that the excuse you give is not a lie. Are we just lazy? And really, all the excuses we give, it's like, yeah, I would have done it, Mañana, right? We know how to just kind of put things off till the next day. And just being lazy, why can you come help me? No, my leg hurts, my arm hurts, my foot hurts, everything hurts. Hey, you want to go play Frisbee? Yeah, let's go. Let's jump around. So what do you want to do? It determines on, how lazy I really am. In Proverbs, it says, the slothful man saith, there is a lion in the way, and there's a lion in the streets. Now, I want you to really take a minute to look at that scripture, okay? Now, is there really a lion in the way? Is there really a lion in the streets? No. It's just the slothful man saying that. It's the lazy guy saying, there might be a lion, there might be some going to. But I thought about these guys here. There was a lion in Daniel's life. There was a lion in David's life. And there's a lion in Samson's life. And that didn't stop him one bit. And we recognize the fact that, we could come up with these little excuses saying, there might be a reason I shouldn't go. Well, go find that reason. Don't keep coming up with excuses that are just as lame as I married me a wife and I cannot come. I bring my wife everywhere I can, except when you guys take her. Sometimes we just need to listen to ourselves. Listen to some of our excuses. I grew up poor. Really? And people will say they grew. It's like, I don't know a lot more families were poor than my family when I grew up. There's 8 kids in my family. And my mom was always sick. And my dad had one income. And we lived in this one house. And me and my 2 brothers, we shared a bed till we were about 10 years old. You were poor? People turn around and use that. I grew up poor, I was raised, we had nothing. It's like, you know what? I was there too, but I got a job when I was 8 years old, and I did not wear my brother's hand-me-downs anymore. I was wearing them for 8 years. I said, no more. So I got a job. I got money. I did something about it. We all could do something about it too. Don't use it as an excuse. Use it as a reason to do something. And how about this one? How many times have we said something like this? It's the credit cards company fault. Now, interesting, this came up today because I paid my card the other day. And it is their fault. No. I the other night I was sitting there and thinking, I'm going to check my emails. I'm thinking, oh wait, I think I got to pay a card. I have like one credit card. And I was like, And I know it's due on the 12th. And so on the 12th, I'm like, oh boy, I got to go. And so I did it. And it says, your payment's posted on the 12th. And then the next day I get an email saying, you missed the payment. I'm like, no, I'm going to fight that one. But the point is, it's my example here is we like to blame other people all the time. That's our excuse. It's not my fault. It's their fault. I didn't do nothing wrong. They did it. And it rolls off the tongue so quickly and so smoothly, we don't even realize the lie that's coming from it, the deceit we're talking about, and the fact that if I just go ahead and be honest with myself, I'm just not diligent sometimes, then I got to work on my diligence, and that won't happen again. Everywhere I go, I have problems. It doesn't matter where I go, I have problems. We had these two kids in our church back in the day. This is 30 years ago, and these two kids, they come to school, they come to church, and they're wild boys. They were. And their mom would come and say, oh, these boys, it just seems like every school I take them to, we've been going from school to school, and everywhere they go, kids just pick on them. Thinking, maybe it's not the schools. I'm saying, maybe it's the kids, because, wherever they go, there they are, right? But it's like we like to put ourselves in that same boat. It's like everywhere I go, I have problems. I just can't get along with this. I can't get along with that one there. Maybe it's you. Maybe the excuse isn't other people. It's myself. I was raised different than you. It's like the reason I do what I do, hey, doesn't bother my conscience to do this thing over here. Doesn't, I'm okay with that thing over there. Raised different than me, but we're trying to accommodate to God's word. It doesn't matter if we're raised differently. We get out of those things. There's been families that I've known that it seems like every time someone turned 17, they got pregnant. And then the boys, they get someone pregnant. A whole family, the mom, all the way down to the children and the grand. 17 is the magic number that someone's getting pregnant. Where do you break the pattern? Who's going to break that pattern? I was raised different than you. It was okay in my family if we did all those things. It's not okay. We can't succumb to that and say, hey, they were just raised that way. That's how they are. And the way they live and what goes on and what kind of things are in their refrigerator and what kind of things are doing. No, we don't use those excuses. We use those at times to fix those problems. We sometimes just think, they're raised different. I'm never going to say that. I'm going to say you're raised different, but I'm going to teach you the right things. I'm going to have you open your Bible to book, chapter, and verse where thus saith the Lord, thou shalt not. And we do that with brethren because we talked about this morning because of love. Period. Because we love each other that much, we want to all go to heaven. And this last one, I heard this one, you just don't get me. That's the reason that me and you don't have a good relationship because you don't get me. And I'm trying, you said, you don't get me where I'm coming from, no. And what kind of excuse is that? For us not to have a relationship or for us to even do whatever we're doing is that you don't get me. Stop it. Proverbs over here in chapter 16, verse 2. Here's what the scripture says. All the ways of the man are clean in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirits. Think about that as we're talking about excuses. All my excuses are clean in my eyes, okay? But the Lord's going to weigh my excuses. He's going to let either, let them be excuses or not. So the human perception on this scripture is people often see their actions as justifiable, or even virtuous based on their own understanding and their own biases. You know what? And sometimes you probably have heard people say this before, boy, pulled the wool over that guy's eyes, didn't I? Huh? And we're so proud of our excuses sometimes. I did the right. Oh man, it was good. And what we turn around and we see what God says here, because the divine interpretation is this: is God has a deeper understanding of the human heart, including motives and intentions. And so, what we think is good, and we were able to sly talk somebody over whatever we did, God says, no, I'm looking at your heart. I understand where you're coming up with this. I know what your intentions are. So all the importance of our motives. So our motive of giving an excuse is this. The proverb here, it highlights God considers not only what a person does, but why they did it. So when I tell excuses, God recognizes that I'm telling the excuses, but he knows why I'm telling that excuse. Is it because I'm lazy? Because I it could be, man, I can't go through the list. There are so many things that I can do to come up with an excuse. But yet it means nothing. No excuses are allowed with God. None. So let's wrap this lesson up with talking about one thing about this. People who use an excuse to help them be justified in not obeying the gospel. We all got them. And I'm going to be honest with you right now. Back in the early 80s, I'd gone to some worships. I'd gone to some Bible classes. My wife got baptized. And I'm just saying, and my biggest excuse was on Thursday night when these Bible classes are going on, I was watching TV. Three's Company was on. I mean, that was a funny show. John Ritter was really funny. That was my excuse. And I look back at today and say, what an idiot. But that was my excuse. I was watching TV. That's why. And so we come up with all kinds of excuses of why not to obey the gospel. Let's read over here in the book of Acts, chapter 24, 22 to 25. And this is about Felix. Now, if we recognize the account going on here, Paul is being in prison, is being questioned. But interesting enough, we're going to talk about a couple things with Felix here, and then we'll talk about Agrippa also, because these two guys had excuses why not to obey the gospel. And when Felix, he heard these things, having more perfect knowledge of that way, he deferred them and said, when to Lysias, the chief captain, shall come down, I will know the uttermost of your matter. And he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and that he should forbid none of his acquaintance to minister to come to him. But after certain days, when Felix, with his wife Drusilla, which was a Jewish, he sent for Paul, and he heard him concerning the faith of Christ, and he reasoned with righteousness and temperance and judgment to come. Felix trembled. I want you to you got to look at this example that Felix knew some things already. Then he came back one day with his wife, and we listened more from Paul. And when he heard it, he trembled and answered, go your way. He says, for this time, he says, when I have a convenient season, that I'll call upon you. What a horrible, horrible excuse. Come back when I have a convenient season. Come back when I have, and I don't know why, and we do know the history of the Jews back in the day. We know that if any of them accepted the fact that Jesus was the Christ and they became Christians, that they would be, everything from them would be taken from them. They would have no housing. They would have nothing, no income. They would be basically cast out of the Jewish nation. And so whatever his reason was, it was an excuse. And then the next chapter, chapter 25, and then chapter 26 is the example of Agrippa. In Acts 25, verse 22, it says, then said Agrippa to Festus, I would also hear the man myself tomorrow. And he said, thou shalt hear him. And on the morrow, when Agrippa was come, and Bernice with great pomp, and was entered into the place of hearing with the chief captains and the principal men of the city at Festus's command, Paul was brought forth, and Festus said, King Agrippa and all the multitude of the Jews have dealt with me, both in Jerusalem and also here, crying that he ought not to live anymore. So they spoke for a little while, and in chapter 26 it says, then Agrippa, Paul said this, believest thou the prophets? I know thou believest. Then Agrippa said, almost you persuaded me to become a Christian. You know, this particular account, this man didn't even offer an excuse he just rejected God. When we start to recognize some of the things that we excuse ourselves from, when we start looking at things like when we hear the gospel, what excuse do you have? I don't know about you, but when I hear something, it doesn't go away. It doesn't. A lot of times when I have Bible studies with people, I have them read it. You go ahead and read this. Because if they read it with their own eyes, then maybe perhaps they're going to see it better. But when you hear the gospel and when you believe it, what takes away, what excuse do you have for not following through? Repenting, the same thing. What excuse do you have to repent? We're told to repent. We're told to confess Jesus. We're told to get baptized. And when we find ourselves saying, well, baptism's a great idea. It's in theory, it's a great thing to do, but I don't know that I really need to do it. Then, of course, you have to start going backwards and say, well, apparently you don't believe. But any excuse we can have on obeying God or being obedient to him, that those excuses don't hold water. No pun intended. But the point being that we recognize that there are so many people we have talked to, and they've come back with an excuse of why they can't become a child of God, why they can't be baptized, why they don't want to turn from their sin. One man told me and my wife one day, he was a Christian, him and his wife, and they said to me, point blank, hey, we got to do what we got to do. And they left the church over sin because they had to do the sin. That's what they're going to do. And we have no excuse to become a Christian, a child of God, and to walk away. Revelation tells us we do this to the end, and we continue to the end. The last thing we want to see God tell us is excuses, excuses, excuses. He's not going to accept any of them. And I think as a good practice, we should probably not practice using excuses on each other. Really get to the heart of the matter, because this all is a heart matter. When we start to use excuses, we use them, to our own advantage. We want to get out of getting in trouble. We want to get out of getting work done. We want to get out of whatever we're doing. So we're going to excuse ourselves, even if it's a lame excuse. Let's not do that. I appreciate your kind attention this morning. And again, I cannot express the love that my wife and I feel for this congregation. I don't know when we're coming back. But for the last few months, I just can't believe the things my wife's been telling me about so many of you guys and the love. I know she's gone to coffee dates with you, dinner dates, and she's gone Bible studies with you. And the list goes on and on. You've kept her busy at a bad time in her life. And I appreciate that so much. And we depart today. We're going to head off on the road tomorrow morning and sign some papers in Knoxville, and then we're going to take off. But I want to give you all a big old hug today before I leave, because my wife will probably kiss all over you. Just because you guys have been so kind. I really, really appreciate you guys. And hey, we have a church in St. Paul area. Come on up and visit us. We really wouldn't mind at all. Right, Clyde? Right? You've been up there. Come on up. Visit us. We would love to have you visit us. But again, appreciate your time. If there's anything that we can do for you this morning, if you need prayers, and you want to talk about baptism, please bring it up to the brethren here. If you've not been baptized yet, we need to talk about that. We need to not use excuses, but let's just find out what God requires of all of us. And so we're going to have a song. And during that song, if you want to come up for the invitation, you certainly are welcome to do that. Let's all stand for that song.